Okay, great. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our next ICODR member meeting. Thank you for joining us. Today, we have my very, very good friend, Zbynek. Zbynek, when was the first time we met each other? My goodness, it must have been almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's quite terrible, but I think that you are right.
Well, terrible, who knows? It attests to the depth of our relationship, my friend.
Exactly.
But Zbynek has been a thought leader in ODR for many, many, many years, and he's the guy really behind Eustace, which was one of my favorite ODR companies of the last decade or two. And he's been doing some really, really interesting projects, and we just wanted to bring him in to provide an update to all of us about the scheme. So we're very interested in learning from you, Zbynek. Thank you for being with us here today. We often start out with just announcements. So I don't know if anyone has, Zbynek and I were just discussing the situation in Ukraine, which is obviously a tragic situation, and Zbynek is in Prague. And I think there's gonna be more things happening, obviously, on that front that Zbynek was just mentioning to me. But does anyone have any announcements they'd like to share before we let Zbynek get started? I will say Brian is moving forward with ODR 2022 in Dublin. It's going to be happening from May 3rd to 5th. We're going to have a hybrid design for the conference. So there'll be online participation options at the same time we have face-to-face. But I just bought my tickets, so I'm going to be there come heck or high water. And I'm looking forward to seeing. Yeah, you want to be there too?
Yes, that's true. So I wait for the registration to open. So please.
Any day. Yeah, we have a call. Leah and Ethan and Brian and Dan Rainey and I are meeting tomorrow to talk through it. But I think he's going to be opening it, and he's putting together, it should be a really interesting program. So please, if you can join us. Pablo, it's not that far from Leicester to Dublin, so I'm hoping to see you there.
I'll be there.
Okay, great. But does anyone else have any other announcements? Or the other thing I would mention also is Alberto's ODR Tech Expo, which he is doing in late April, just before the ODR meeting in Dublin. It's going to be amazing. I mean, we all know that when Alberto does one of these things, he really does it. So I urge you to check that out and register. There's going to be presentations from all over the world. A lot of it will be in Spanish. So only Pablo can appreciate that. I don't think we have any fluent Spanish speakers on the call, but we're going to have a whole English track as well. So please carve that out in your schedule. So any other things, any other items to share before we hand the baton over to Zbynek? Well, we can discuss it obviously at the end of our time together too. So Zbynek, please. Thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to see you, and give us the update on the things that you've been working on.
Okay. So thank you very much, Colin, for inviting me. And I would like to speak about the EU project, which we started actually this Monday. We had our kickoff on Monday. And it's a 2-year project. It's publicly funded. And I put together the contents of the proposal, but obviously we have a very good team of lawyers, but also experts on artificial intelligence and online ethics from Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, and Poland. In addition to Czech Republic, I am from Czech Republic. And really, I started to work on the contents of the project something like more than 5 years ago, when I left Eustace, which was the company I founded, but then unfortunately it did not come out well. So, but basically I learned a lot, and scheme is, I would say, I think you say it in the US, to fail forward. Is that correct? Yeah. So scheme is one of the fail forwards for myself, and so in fact it is the beginning of an open digital model, digital mapping of the future e-justice or online dispute resolution procedures. Now, when we uh, when we predict how the e-justice or ODR will look like in few years, I think that all of us can imagine that there will be very different platforms and systems for different state online courts, private ODR providers, etc. I think that there will also be uh, slightly different applications for people and the parties basically to access such ODR or e-justice system. And all these platforms for accessing the ODR or e-justice or to provide ODR. So they will need to communicate with each other, share information, etc. And for that, such a digital model, open and very flexible digital model, is very useful, or that's what we think so. Uh, we have our key assumption. Well, basically, I would say two key assumptions of the project. The first key assumption, is that we believe that in order to preserve the right of fair trial and all the other rights in the online world associated with the basic right of fair trial, that it is necessary that the control of the data related to e-justice or ODR will be decentralized, will continue to be decentralized. So one of the key topics of our project is what will be necessary, if anything, to propose to have in terms of technology or rules to preserve this decentralized character of the control of data. So that's the first assumption. The second assumption is that, and it is very closely related to the first assumption, and it is that the future, that the mapping, the model should support ethical principles of the online environment, including the machine learning and artificial intelligence, and including the access to justice for even for vulnerable persons. So this is the second assumption. Now, uh, uh, basically following from these
All right, Zbynek, okay, Zbynek, can you hear me? You're breaking up a little bit.
I think it is clear that for massive sharing me. Hello.
Yes, Zbynek, I'm sorry, you broke up there for a minute. So if you could just go back 10 seconds and repeat what you said. You finished your second principle, that the model should support ethical principles of online environment, including machine learning, artificial intelligence, and access to justice for vulnerable parties. But we lost you after that.
Okay, well, do you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so what I was saying is that it follows from these assumptions that there will be a need for massive sharing of mostly anonymized data between the applications, between the platforms and the applications. And there will also be a need for new technology, emerging technology, which would enable the decentralized control, which would be probably, which might be different if which might be different than the current technology of, let's say, server-browser relationship.
Mhm.
So, uh, so, so basically, uh, the the important thing is what will be the outcome of the scheme project. Uh, in short, there will be open specifications which will be uh, open, of course, flexible. It will be the beginning for further work, which can be then used by designers of online platforms for ODR providers or access tools for people. Uh, and uh, I think that uh, it will be possible to describe the scheme in three layers. The first layer will be process layer, and this will be basically sort of an attempt at the beginning of the description of the standard e-justice or ODR procedures and sub-procedures. So that would be the first layer. And obviously, it will not be comprehensive, but we would just like to lay grounds for the future expansion to prepare and discuss the structure of such model, the rules for describing the different procedures, etc. So this will be the process layer. The second layer will be data layer. Yeah. And again, this will be, this is probably where the most of our research will be done because and this is dictated by the need for the massive data sharing in the future between decentralized ODR providers or the parties, basically, for the, for the purposes of the future AI and AI-related services. And the third layer will be technology layer. So now the scheme project is not a technology project, but of course we are following, and we have been in direct contact with the emerging technology in US, in Europe, which relate to Web3 and associated technologies with Web3. So now, in addition to ethical questions, which are key for the project, there will be also other key questions, which and I would mention only three of them. Uh, the first question is whether there will be a need for some new public services with a new governance to ensure that the control of data will continuously remain decentralized despite this massive data sharing. So this is one of the key questions in my view. The second question is whether there will be a need to continuously maintain the initial open specifications and manage the new services. So there is a very interesting and important question of whether there will be a need of any new governance or not. And the third question is uh, how to achieve massive scalability, which will be necessary for the deliverables using the scheme to initiate a viable option to the current internet ODR. So this is so these are uh, some of the issues
Mhm.
behind the scheme. It is, as I said, the team. I have been working on it for more than 5 years. Uh, initially, I called it like a concept of open ODR, but then basically we come together in with a team of few persons from different European countries, and we have been working, discussing now for almost 3 years, and we prepared the proposals like 1 year ago, and got funded uh, uh, and we start the project right now. Uh, I would like to say that now, of course, uh, we uh, we would like to share everything, and what we will do, what we will propose, and also to organize consultations, testing, etc. Uh, I even uh, I even uh, came to few of ICODR members, and asked for whether you would like to be part of our advisory board. Those of you who accepted will receive an email tomorrow saying that yes, there is a green light, etc. But we would also be very happy if ICODR is interested in what we will be doing,
Mhm.
and if you can participate in public consultations, testing,
Mhm.
etc.
Mhm.
So, so I think that this will be for the introduction.
Fantastic, fantastic. Zbynek, there's so much rich stuff for us to discuss in here. And I think this is very much in line with what we've talked about at ICODR through its organization. It makes me think a lot also about some of the things that Amy Schmitz and I wrote in our book, New Handshake, when we were talking about
Yeah,
what would a global, but I think this notion of a public entity, an open entity that can serve as a repository for all of this data and sort of enforce process and ethical rules. So it might be that the ODR organizations that opt in to participate in the scheme would then have to agree to abide by certain ethical obligations around the use of the data. I mean, if we are going to be educating artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms so that they can decide these cases in the future, we're going to need enormous, enormous data sets. And
yeah,
it's not that one company is going to be able to build a large enough data set. We all together need to agree to contribute our data to a central repository so that we can train these algorithms, but then also ensure that the algorithms behave in an ethical way. So I think this is fascinating, fascinating. So let me ask you a couple questions about it. So who are the participants in the scheme now? I know you've gotten
okay.
funding from the EU. Is it mostly academics? Is it legal law professors? Is it other ODR providers? You know, who's on your team?
Yeah, okay. So and but let me first answer your question, and then
Please,
I will
please.
comment. Yeah. So uh, they are practitioners and academic experts with practice, but all of us are involved in practice. So,
Mm-hmm,
for example, I am a lawyer. I am in private practice, but I have been designing and I am designing ODR systems internationally and nationally in the Czech Republic. So that's I would say now 99% of what I do. Uh, the other team members are AI experts, so they are mathematicians, or mathematicians and lawyers. For example, uh, uh, Michal Araskiewicz from Jagiellon University from Poland. I think that he presented in one of the ODR conferences, and he he's a top European expert on modeling of judicial procedures. Also looking at machine learning, etc. Then Davide Carneiro from the Politecnico di Porto. So he is a mathematician and apart from teaching at the Politecnico di Porto, he is also one of the heads of Portuguese AI research and AI infrastructure. Then we have basically we have two academics from the European University Institute from Italy, from Firenze, and they are actually they spend their time training and educating judges and judiciary across Europe.
Wow.
So and they will be responsible for testing and consulting with the judiciary in a number of EU countries. Yeah. And so I would say that this is the core team. Then actually we have been lucky. We sort of even basically before the kickoff, we pre-established our advisory board. And again, there are experts from practice. There is Kevin Ashley from Pittsburgh, who is one of the world top AI expert for legal procedures and also ODR. Of course, I contacted you, Colin, and you have been interested in participating.
Sure.
And few other members of ICODR. There are people from Yoshihisa Hayakawa from Japan, who is now leading discussions about new international standards for ODR, etc. So there are people who are very practically oriented, and they have expertise in the field covered by the project. And of course, this is the very beginning. So we would need the project in order to be successful. Will need to have sort of as wide interest of different experts from all around the world as possible.
Wow, what an amazing team. I mean, and I have to say, as interested as I am in artificial intelligence and machine learning, sometimes when I sit down and work with people who are PhDs and developers in the space, I can get lost in the complexity of it. There's just so much promise and potential there. And I think I understand how we could use these tools kind of in the context of an ODR process, but to think about the amount of data and actually building that AI and structuring it in such a way that it can analyze new cases coming in and provide meaningful outcome, it's very complicated. So to have these experts on your team is amazing, Zbynek. And part of me feels I listen to what you say and I know the need is there, but I don't know specifically how it's going to work. But I think you probably don't know that either, nor does your team. Everyone together is going to have to figure out how is this sort of new governance layer going to operate. And, I'm interested to hear what other people think, but I think this is a perfect exercise for ICODR to be involved in. So let me just see, does anybody have any comments or questions for Zbynek about what he's shared so far?
Yeah.
Bob, please.
I think the exercise is good. I think part of the problem is that machine learning requires quite a bit of labeled data. And since in the case of mediation, data has been, for the most part, confidential, getting access or accumulating it is kind of problematic. The other side of this, of course, is that AI or machine learning algorithms are really good at recognizing things, but not necessarily things that require lots of sequential steps. And so it's becomes, the issue then becomes, you know, is it the black box algorithms that are causing a problem, or is it the way we train the algorithms that are causing the problem? And then if something isn't behaving ethically, even if we could define what that meant, how do you fix it? Because is it the algorithm or is it the data? And then how much data you have to go look through to see if there was some inherent bias built in. So I understand this is a fairly complex problem. I don't know. I think a good start for maybe ICODR is to start understanding, you know, what we mean by ethics of AI in the context of justice, because that's doesn't seem to be defined in any reasonable way. And I'm not talking about, you know, a whole list of propositions of, you know, Spinoza's ethics. I'm talking about something that's very usable that can be applied. And so that's kind of my comments.
What do you think about that, Zbynek?
No, yes, of course. And yes, I agree. And but actually, our ambition is not to resolve AI for e-justice or ODR. Our ambition is to create, to try to create foundations, like very basic foundations, for the ethical use of AI for some services, basically improving or trying to improve access of people to justice, to online justice. So this, I would say, is our ambition, and that means that this is I would say, and you are right, Colin, that we do not know whether our project is something which can hold water, or whether it is complete stupidity.
Well, it's not stupidity. For me, it's a timing question of, you know, where. Yeah, please, what were you going to say, Zbynek? Oh, and I see Anil has something he wants to share too. But Zbynek, I'm sorry I cut you off. What did you want to say? Did you want to finish your point? Yeah. Okay, great. I'm sorry. There's a little delay. Let me just quickly, before Anil, I come to you, I do want to share some slides that I think describe this report that was issued by the Council of Europe in 2018 that was specifically about the use of artificial intelligence in justice systems. And I urge you to look it up. I think it's a very interesting document. Again, it was 4 years ago, but they do call out these principles. And I've been thinking at ICODR, maybe we should also have a document with standards for the use of AI in online dispute resolution. And I found this document quite inspirational in terms of how we could try and structure that. But one, they have this, exactly what you said, Zbynek, this respect for the fundamental rights of people. So AI shouldn't invalidate the right to a trial, for instance, or invalidate the right to privacy. So I think you already spoke to that one. The second one is the principle of non-discrimination. And this one to me is a little bit more complicated, right? Because there's a lot of research about how you can say to an AI, you know, we're not going to tell you the race of the parties, but it will then go into the data and find other correlations that it can use to replicate some of that. And it can perpetuate, discriminatory outcomes between groups, especially if you're using past data. The third one is quality of data. So who gets to put data into the system, and also how is it secure? You know, how do we ensure that that data is not used for inappropriate purposes? The fourth principle is transparency, impartiality, and fairness, making sure that everybody understands the methods and authorizing external audits of the process. And the last one that I think is really important is AI always operates under user control. So we don't just set up an AI and then let it decide all the cases without review. You can have an AI that comes in and delivers, for instance, non-binding outcomes that are instantly appealable to a human. But this notion of AI is just a tool and users have to be in control. They need to be informed actors. And I think if anyone gets an AI outcome they disagree with, they have the ability for an instant request of a human review. You know, that's the way that I think about it. I think pretty much that's I just wanted to share those because I think that's an interesting framework for how we maybe at ICODR could think about how we would issue our own standards for AI, or maybe in partnership with the scheme, we could do that.
Yeah.
So
yes, I agree. The study is very good, and the authors of the study are also very good. So if you follow also the authors, you will get a good view. It is. Can I comment a little bit?
Please,
on the,
no, and then we'll go to Anil
okay.
after your comment. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will be brief. Basically, it is interesting, and this goes to our project, that when you start when we started thinking about how to implement these principles in practice, we came also to the notion of the decentralized control of data. Yeah, that basically, and once you come to the notion of the decentralized control of data, it will come to technology. So what the technology will need to look like to ensure to help with that. Yeah. So and also whether, and these are basically research questions or speculation. So whether the technology itself should have or might have some characteristics or some features which would help to achieve these principles. So this is interesting, and I would say one more thing, that that in these discussions it is necessary to take into account that the e-justice or ODR is extremely cross-domain oriented. That, as Itan is saying, disputes are the growth industry, and the disputes or dissatisfactions appear in all areas. So ODR and e-justice and the modeling of e-justice ODR processes needs to take into account also this cross-domain character, and this makes it even more interesting. So that's
absolutely. Anil, let me come to you. I saw you nodding.
Yeah, it's really, really exciting what you guys are talking about. I just wanted to share. I just finished 2 months at the Singapore Management University on a program, an executive program on artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Oh, perfect.
I've got 2 more assignments that are due. It's assignments every week, and it's like, crazy. And all of my classmates were all non-lawyers, and they couldn't understand what I was doing there. And I had to, at every time we had a breakout group, I was explaining to them what I see the correlationship between online dispute resolution, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. And it was so very exciting. So there are 2 key points I wanted to highlight. One is the technology that's available, and 2 is what Colin had mentioned about ethics and all of that. So on the technology part, I think there are things in place, and the technology is moving forward enough for some level of augmented or artificial intelligence playing a part in ODR. But whether or not it gets ultimately to a stage where it can decide, make decisions, I think we are close. I think we're maybe 40, 50 years away. But an appreciation about machine learning and artificial intelligence and how they all function is absolutely critical for people like all of us who are on board for ODR. So I think that's absolutely critical. And this point about data and how you gather and retrieve the data of decisions and how the judges made a certain this thing, that in itself is going to be such an enormous exercise that it'll really take people who are legally trained and ODR to get to that level. So that's one. On the ethics part, I think, yes, it's also very, very important, because how artificial intelligence and machine learning works and operates within the parameters, we really have to put some control over that and then manage that very carefully. So I think ICODR is in a really good position to be able to help, whether it's on this project that we've been discussing today, or overall setting up a scheme and then a whole framework that internationally we can follow. So I think it's really quite important. And Colin, you were there last week when we were with Yoshi in Japan, and so they're doing things. So all of these things are really quite critical, and the technology angle coming on board and setting a clear framework. I think we're really going to have to shift gear in a massive way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more, Anil, and I'll hand it back to you in a second, Zbynek, to make a reaction. I will say my experience with AI researchers, when I go to these conferences and I see demos of what they're working on, it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazingly cool. But they ask themselves, can we do this? And then they do an experiment to do it, and then they get better and better at it. But they're not asking themselves, should we do this? They don't have the ethical thinking in mind about how do we use these tools to help deliver things like access to justice and fast and fair resolutions. I saw they had a project that some AI researchers did to look at scans of people's faces, and they could determine to like 98% accuracy their ethnic orientation. And they got enormous data set. As Bob said, it was a tagged set of faces, like, I don't know, 10 million faces. And then they went through and then they trained the algorithm. And, they issued essentially a research report that said, look, we were successful. We were able to design this. And then someone said, should you be doing this? Like, couldn't bad people use this technology to do some very dangerous and terrible things? And they were sort of like, oh, well, it's just an academic project. I mean, we don't have any designs about what we're going to do with it. We just wanted to see whether or not we could make a computer do it. So what I like about Zbynek, the team you're pulling together, is you have the experts, and that's kind of what Anil is saying. You've got the AI people, but then you also have to bring in the legal people and the ODR experts and the ethical people to answer the question of, should we do this? How can we govern this? If we get this giant data set and we just give it to everybody, it could lead to abuse. But if we had a system that was sort of enforcing these ethical standards and ethical rules and ethical principles, and say the only people that get access to this data are the people that agree to these rules, I agree with Anil. I think we're still decades away from a digital arbitrator or a digital judge. Everybody talks to me about that. And Georgia asked a great question as well about, well, what does this practically mean for mediators and arbitrators? I think we're still very far away from that. But I do think, and Anil, I'm sure you saw this in your class, AI is very useful for very narrow tasks. Like natural language processing is incredibly powerful to read a paragraph of text and say, what is this person trying to say? Or to route a case into appropriate channel. Is this a landlord-tenant case, or is this a family case? Well, AI is actually proven to be pretty good at that at our current stage. It's not going to be deciding these cases, but it can really help us with triage and organization, and also tagging, as Bob said, tagging the data in these cases, so we can build a data set so that future algorithms can be smarter, because AI is going to be. So anyway, I talked too much. Zbynek, what do you think? What are your thoughts about all of this?
No, that's I think that this is I agree. I agree. It is very interesting that when I speak with some of the software engineers who work on the new internet technology, on etc. So they basically, more and more of them think that ODR will be in the near future also part of the infrastructure, part of the digital infrastructure. So something like ID. Yeah. So and that's very interesting. Yeah, and also I think that that we are in the beginning of the process where actually we should be we should start to design ODR so that it can actually safeguard some of the principles. So some of the ethical principles of the internet, basically. So, for example, we have now many people, at least in Europe, are, including me personally, simply do not like very much online advertisements. So you may like it very much. I don't like it. So, and in Europe, in like 99% of online advertisements are contrary to GDPR. Yeah. So there is basically almost nothing in practical terms which can be done against it. There are some decisions, it takes ages, etc., and nothing happens in practice. So why not design an ODR system which would help to simply, which would be potentially, and now I brainstorm, which would be even connected not only with fair procedural rules, which will be very quick online, based on like standard evidence, etc., but also which would be connected with some new technical remedies, which would enable which would enable to take down the infringing online advertisements, etc. So I think that that we are in the beginning of the discussion of let's say of how to use ODR in connection with new technology in a much broader way than up to now, to help dealing with the issues which bother people on the internet. So and this is also I believe, or we believe, that for that you need to start creating this like model, digital mapping, etc., because this would enable them to so that each country can map their own procedures which are different from the other countries, etc., so that the others would understand. And our ambition is definitely not to do it, to do the model, but to start it, to lay the foundations. And of course, for that, we need a very wide discussion of everybody who would be interested.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think this notion of a governance layer is very appealing to me. And I love the idea of an open governance layer. I think that that's kind of the way. I mean, are there any organizations that have the model that you aspire to, Zbynek? I mean, I think about ICANN, which has been kind of a mess, but it has been effective in running the global domain system. It's obviously got so many stakeholders from around the world. It can be very chaotic, but what do you think this organization, what do you think the scheme would look like once it hits scale? Do you think it'd have elected representatives? Do you think they'd have public meetings? Have you had thoughts about that?
Well, of course, but basically, I think that this is, of course, this is one of the key questions, because Colin. So my view is the least governance, the better, basically. So that's the first thing. So the idea is whether and this is these are like starting points of our discussion. So will there be a need for new governance or not? Yeah, so that's the first thing. So now the second issue is that maybe basically, and this is just so almost a crazy question, but what can be done by the artificial intelligence, or by the basically by automatized processes in this respect, and what will need to be done by humans? Yeah. So I am not even so we are not even sure at the moment that there is really a need of an institution which will have which will because we prefer that the model actually tries to ensure this decentralization. Maybe there will be like a set of common rules which then will be like approved, voted by the participants, etc. But all this is really in the very beginning, and it's very exciting. I think that this is something which we will need to discuss, to research and discuss again in as wide forum as possible.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the question of scalability is very interesting to me. I think any human-powered system is not really going to be able to operate at the level. If this is humans putting the data into the system, it's not going to get big enough fast enough. And if this is humans governing the behavior of all of the participants of the network, it's not going to be able to work efficiently enough. As you say, I think it's got to be code. You have to put these rules into code, and the code has to be self-enforcing. That's the only way that you can scale to the size of the need. That's the whole idea of decentralized justice, is it's going to be software that runs the system. It's not going to be people. And there's a lot of hard questions that need to be answered in order to get that to work. But the law of tomorrow is computer code. It's not statutes.
Well, or combination.
Yeah.
But I simply believe that we are at the time when we need to discuss these questions.
Yeah, I agree.
And really, we have a 2-year project. So so really, the purpose of the project is to see whether we really are able to start doing something in this direction or not.
Bob,
yeah.
Yeah, Bob, what did you want to say?
Well, it seems like some of these arguments are circular in the sense that we build artificial intelligence or machine learning systems because of the cognitive bandwidth limitations of humans. But then just to make sure it doesn't make a mistake, we put a human in charge of checking it. Seems somewhat circular. And, if you want scalability for software, then you have to agree on international standards. I mean, I did standards for 15 years at Intel, and it takes quite a bit of work to get people to, participate voluntarily and agree. Because unless you have a well-defined set of standards, you won't get scalability. It's just the way it is, especially.
Well, yeah, and I'm heavily involved with this ISO effort around e-commerce ODR, and boy, it goes in circles and circles. We had something called ODR XML, which was back in 2003, 2004. Do you remember that, Zbynek? And it was it was like trying to define an XML data structure for ODR cases so that platforms could communicate with each other and adopt the data standard. But it was so early. It was pre-Facebook. It was pre-iPhone. It was eBay. We were right in the middle of building this. We came up with a data spec, but it was so hard to come up with one data specification that would work for all the different kinds of disputes. I mean, a family dispute is very different than a landlord-tenant dispute, which is different than an e-commerce dispute. So we had a sort of a lowest common denominator set of fields that we collected, but nobody ever deployed the standard we came up with. So anyway, there's so many interesting questions here. And I see, Anil, you shared the link to that document, the 2018 document. So I do think that's a place for us to look. What does everyone on the call think ICODR should do in this area? Should we kind of sit on our hands and wait until it matures a little bit further? I mean, Zbynek is definitely out front in terms of putting the scheme together. What I don't want to do is issue a set of AI standards from ICODR, kind of like the standards we did for ODR XML. We get out too early and then we issue a set of standards, and then down the road, it turns out they're not really relevant because, the use of AI became much more sophisticated and mature. And, we were sort of operating on a very high level of abstraction. Or do you think this is something that we should get ahead of and we should issue ICODR standards on AI, and then we can revise them downstream if it turns out, things move in a different direction? What do you guys think as sort of leaders in this area? I know it looks like you have an opinion.
I think we should work together, instead of us just working independently and coming up with a framework. If we work on this project together, we will then understand where it's headed to, and then we can set the standards in place as well.
Yeah, that would be ideal. That would be absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I do think what we've done with our past standards is we've taken the ethical principles of ICODR, those high level, accessible, transparent, secure, confidential, and then we've applied them in certain areas. So what we could do is we could create a one-page document that says ICODR principles, ICODR standards for AI in ODR, and then we could go through and list, these are our ethical principles, and this is how it's relevant to what happens in AI. Maybe that would be an interesting thing to take a swing at drafting. Maybe Anil, now you're finishing your class, I'll work with you on this. Maybe we'll put something together. But I think we could be inspired by this European ethical charter. And I think we would like to do it, Zbynek, obviously, in partnership with the scheme. It would be great to, like, we're talking about issuing some standards for data security, and we're doing that in conjunction with CyberArb, which is an initiative in Europe that's focused on data security and arbitration. Maybe this could be something similar. Maybe we would jointly issue ethical standards for the use of AI and ODR with the scheme.
Yes, I would say that University Twente from the Netherlands, which is part of the team, so they are considered the best in Europe on online ethics. So
great.
They are really good. And actually, some of the team members from Twente University are from US, for example.
Great. Well, you've built an amazing team. I don't, trying to get all these people on the same page. I applaud you because it's going to be complicated because everyone has their own agendas. But if anybody's going to figure this out, I think it's going to be you and your team, Zbynek. So, other thoughts, comments, questions for Zbynek? I know we're getting short on time here. Pablo, I just saw you come back on. Do you have something?
Sorry. Yeah, I was wondering, as the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning is particularly attractive for high volume disputes, and I have an interest in consumer issues that seems particularly suitable for that. And Amazon is using it, and is currently being used. But I wonder, as it is incorporated to ODR processes, and in Europe, in the European Union, we have a process of certifying these ODR processes that meet the criteria, the legislative criteria, that they have to be independent, impartial, and so on. I wonder how you can monitor the black box of artificial intelligence to ensure that it is impartial, it doesn't have built-in biases. And the specific question is, currently, basically the sector regulators, like the Financial Conduct Authority, certifies the ODR provider to deal with financial disputes, with complaints against banks, for instance. But they will not have the expertise to examine the artificial intelligence component of an ODR provider. And the specific question I have is whether you think that maybe bodies who will specialize in maybe monitoring these schemes to ensure that, in particular, there are concerns that the businesses, large players, will game the system to their advantage, and to ensure that these comply with these ethical principles that have been discussed. I wonder whether any of you have thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yes, so sorry. So if I can very quickly respond, and sorry, I jumped sort of ahead, so I apologize. But it seems that all over the world there will be a mandatory certification of these systems sometimes in the future. EU obviously tries to, without basically, and now I have to criticize the Commission because they already issued like a draft regulation for this mandatory certification scheme of AI systems, of sensitive AI systems, without necessary research, etc. but even in other jurisdictions, I know that there are discussions in US, definitely in Canada, but also in countries like New Zealand and so on. And it seems that the unifying message is that it will go in the direction of mandatory certification of these, let's say, AI systems in sensitive areas, definitely in e-justice or ODR. But for example, the issue of bias or let's say explainability of AI is one of the key ethical issues of our research as well. And for example, Davide Carneiro is one of the leading European experts in this area. So, but again, scheme is not like the answer for everything. I think scheme is just, I would even say that we will try to construct the beginning in discussion with as many interested persons as possible, which can grow to something being useful. So that's.
Yeah, and I would just pitch in on that. I mean, Pablo, this is the hottest topic at Stanford in the Valley. You know, automating inequality or weapons of mass destruction or ethical use of AI. There is no question that high power players, particularly businesses and consumer transactions, are going to use and abuse these mechanisms however they can to get the upper hand. So I think that there's enormous danger there. And hopefully one of the benefits of an open governance mechanism like this, or review by organizations like ICODR, is that hopefully we can provide some auditing to try and combat some of those dynamics. But I know this is, you can easily see how tools like this with the black box, where we don't really know what rationales are going on inside, it can be used to disadvantage vulnerable populations at scale. And then companies can use it, just wash their hands. Well, the AI, they made those decisions. So I think we're going to need to be a watchdog on that count. Bob, did you have something you wanted to say on that point before we wrap?
I tend to agree with you. Humans are really not very good at creating rules or following them to begin with. And so certification is also a difficult problem for AI unless you've narrowed it down to a very small domain that you think this will work in. Look, we have self-driving cars right now for some number of years, but no one's figured out how to give a car a driver's license or what kind of test the car has to pass to be a driver, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's not very efficient at doing these things.
Well, and you have to measure the efficacy and the justice of an algorithm via outcome. And that's hard to do if you don't know the process. Like if you train a driver, you say, okay, look, this is what you do when you get into a parallel parking space. You check your mirrors, you do this, you do that. The AI figures it out itself, and you don't even know what it's doing. All you know is, well, looks like it goes in the parking space pretty well. So fingers crossed. So
the question is, does it go into all parking spaces?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, of course, we can do at least something. And what is interesting is that ODR as such, in my view, can help, but we need to adapt ODR so that it can help. And finally, I think that ODR can be such in the same way as the court and the justice systems are actually guardians of the basic rights of people. I believe that ODR, step by step, it can be such a guardian also in the online space. But we need to start changing ODR and building new approaches, basically. And for that, I think that the modeling, the digital mapping, which will be open, flexible, etc., so it can contribute.
Absolutely. And with that, let me pull this meeting to an end. Zbynek, thank you so much for your presentation. This is great. A round of applause. Can't wait to hear more about it in Dublin. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Take care, keep in touch, and we'll see you next month at the next ICODR meeting. Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.